Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. From land selection to site work to utility excavation, walls, and framing, get some in-depth learning on how a home is actually built today. We also discuss home builder sentiment in this era of higher interest rates and higher rents today on Get Rich Education. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to fourplexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. Knowing the difference between a turnkey provider and a vertically integrated rental property company can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. Some companies sell you a property they don't own, renovate it with contractors they don't control, refer you to a property management company they don't manage, all in multiple markets because they can't source enough inventory. That's why truly passive investors work with our friends at JWB Real Estate Capital, perhaps the country's only vertically integrated rental property investment company. They operate in one market, Jacksonville, Florida, and their whole job is to make investing in rental properties easy for you. In fact, because of their vertically integrated approach, their clients have gained 79% more home price appreciation than the overall Jacksonville market since 2013. Find out more about why it pays to invest with JWB. Call them at 904-677-6777 or go to jwbrealestate.com/GRE.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, the voice of real estate investing every single week since 2014. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Before we discuss home building, where do you invest your money today? There are so many choices. Do you invest in a primary residence, if that's even investing at all? Well, that might be a good lifestyle investment for you, but more and more sources believe that a price point of, say, $800,000 or $900,000 for a single-family home in a market that got hot during the health crisis, like a Nashville, Austin, Boise, Phoenix, or Miami, that they have vulnerable price points and could take a bit of a fall. What about you investing in the dollar in the form of saving money? Well, persistently high inflation makes it the worst time to do that in 40 years, although the dollar has had strength relative to other currencies. How about gold? Well, that hasn't done anything in inflation. Cryptocurrency. Hey, that was supposed to be a savior in inflation. At least Bitcoin was with its fixed supply. But this lingering crypto winter has shown that the asset class is often correlated with stock price movement. There was irresponsible leverage in the crypto system. Leverage isn't always bad, but crypto failed in inflation. Many think that stocks are going to have a hard time taking off until a Fed pivot is apparent. A pivot, meaning when the Fed reveals their plan to lower interest rates or just cool off with the rate hikes. Well, then there is what we do, buy and hold income property in stable markets. It continues to be one of the most reliable places that you can put your money, that you can essentially liquidate your dollars into something real and tangible in a product that everyone needs in a recession, housing. Now, you know how I often describe that these investor advantage markets are in the Midwest and South. That's the phrase I'm always using, the Midwest and South. There are some exceptions, but that's generally where they are. Well, I found it remarkable that a recent article in Mortgage Professionals of America, it basically said that high-priced markets are at the risk of a downturn, like I mentioned earlier. But here is a quote from that article. It says, by contrast, southern and Midwestern states were less exposed to a potential downturn in the housing market. That's the end of the quote. I mean, are they GRE listeners over there or what? It's almost exactly the way I've been saying it from day one here. I usually phrase it Midwest and South. They phrase it Southern and Midwestern. Remarkable. Well, today we are really going deep, almost in a literal sense, with how a home is built, even digging in the dirt and grading a site before development. There are a lot of things here that you probably have not thought about before. How do those utilities ever get set up in the first place and more? This might be about the most condensed and summarized version of that you're going to hear today. That is straight ahead. Today is the 8th anniversary of the GRE podcast. Yeah, this show launched on October 10th, 8 years ago. And today, I'm not in the Midwest or South. We're talking about this show's birth. Well, I'm in the nation's birthplace, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania today. I spent the last couple days in Reading, Pennsylvania, about an hour northwest of here in Philadelphia. Reading is my birthplace. A lot of birthplaces on the show here today. Mine, the nation's, and the show's. As I like to say, Reading always has a spot on the Monopoly board. You might know it from the Reading Railroad property that you can buy in the board game Monopoly. And yes, it's not the Reading Railroad. It's pronounced the Reading Railroad, even though it's spelled like reading. It's Pennsylvania's fourth largest city. It's had population growth as there are 420,000 residents in the greater Reading area. It has a poverty problem, though, and that problem is quite visible. It does have real producing industries. It has amenities like museums and arts and sports and nearby forests, and it's got 4 colleges. But as it changes, Reading always has that spot on the Monopoly board. Hey, I've got 2 quick announcements for you here. Our valuable Don't Quit Your Daydream newsletter is full of real estate investing industry trends and forecasts and broader economic forces that are going to affect you in the future and more. Also, whenever we have job openings here at GRE, as we keep growing, they are announced in the letter as well. Well, you can now easily sign up for the letter by text. Yeah, just get out your phone. If you aren't yet one of the many subscribers expanding your means with my letter, you can simply text GRE to 66866 for our Don't Quit Your Daydream letter. Yeah, you're going to be on the list. It is free. I write every single word of the letter myself. I don't think that many founders do that, but this letter is truly from me to you. Again, you can sign up by simply texting GRE to 66866 for our Don't Quit Your Daydream letter. Also, sign up for our upcoming webinar. It is going to be October 20th for Jacksonville, Florida. The benefit of attending the webinar is that it is live. I'm going to be there with you and the property provider. We're going to look at individual properties that you can buy in the path of progress. And then, of course, you can ask questions at the end of the conversation. Get your questions answered. That is free. Sign up at grewebinars.com for our Jacksonville webinar. Brand new build properties that provide some cash flow is what you're going to find there. Again, it's at grewebinars.com. That's where you can register. Let's learn about how a home actually gets built and more. We are talking to a home builder today with what he's seeing on the ground. Chris Funk is back on the show to bring us up to date on industry trends because he founded one of America's top highest volume build to rent investment property providers in America. He's also in property management. He manages thousands of doors, and he is one of our GRE marketplace providers. Hey, Chris, welcome back onto the show.
Great to see you again, sir. How are you?
Hey, fantastic. But you got your work cut out for you. That's quite a resume that I read for you there, and you're going to have to live up to it. But what you always do, Chris, you don't sell homes to owner-occupied buyers. You sell rental homes to investors. That's really who you serve. And you serve mostly Florida and a little bit of Georgia as well.
Correct. Absolutely. We only do investment properties.
Yeah. And being that build to rent provider, meaning you build a brand new construction project and product for that investor that ends up buying it. Why don't we talk about that home construction lifespan, maybe starting back with where you have to secure vacant land tracts. Now, I would imagine that you need to have enough vacant land that you already secure and own ahead of time so that you can confidently build. But I would imagine then on the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to get too much vacant land that will take you a while to build upon because you have some carrying costs related to owning too much property at one time that isn't built on. So tell us in that construction lifespan about that securing vacant land tracts part and how you're sure you don't have too much or too little.
Great question. We have two different types of land that we buy. One is what we call infill lots. That means that they're developed lots in communities that already have houses around. And for whatever reason, a home wasn't built on a particular lot. So I take our Ocala market, for instance. Back in the 70s and 80s, developers went and developed all these lots, sold the lots off to individuals that lived up north that were planning on building retirement homes. Well, some people did build retirement homes and some people didn't. So the people that didn't build retirement homes, those lots have stayed in the family and been passed down, or maybe the original owner is older and still owns them. And so we have to go track those people down. In that type of lot acquisition, our acquisition team has to find somebody that lives out in Kansas City. We find them in the tax rolls, the lot that they own. We find their address, and then we have to back into getting a phone number, an email address. We can typically get their home address from the tax rolls. We'll send them letters and whatnot. It's a very labor-intensive process to find those individual lots. But we really love those lots because they're build ready. We don't have to do a lot of work to them to get started. The downside being is we have to buy them immediately. So when you find somebody and they say, yes, I'm willing to sell my lot, we have to buy it right then and there, typically within 30 days. They don't really let you have a long inspection period or a long contracting period, which is, contrary to the other side of our business, which is land development, where basically we take I guess all land's old. You take a piece of land that, was maybe a farm or a wooded area. We have to go get an engineer to design the roads and the sewer and the water lines and all the retention ponds. It's all the things that we take for granted when we drive down the street every day. That as a developer, when you're done, it took you 3 years from beginning to end to get that street put in the ground. So that's about the other half of our business is that type of deal. And when we find that, we typically find it in pretty much the same way. You find a vacant piece of land, you have to track down the owner and talk them into selling the land to you. But in those situations, we can typically get much longer contracts, meaning that we say, hey, we want to buy your land, but it's not zoned for single family residential. It's not engineered for a subdivision. And so we have to explain all of that to the property owner and say, this is a process to make that happen. So if we have to rezone the property, that could take 6 months. We have to engineer the property, that could take 6 to 9 months. And then once the property is fully engineered is typically when we would then want to close on that property. We try to not close on property until it's been rezoned and engineered. Now, sometimes we will buy it before the engineering's done, but almost never will we buy it before the zoning's done. That means that we contract and we don't close for another year to 15 months.
That's a long runway.
It's a long runway. And then once we close, then we have to develop the land. And to develop one of our 100-lot subdivisions, that could take another 12 months. Before we put the first slab in the ground on building a home, we're already well over 2 years into that project. As a developer, we have to take a very long approach to these deals, and we're looking at land that's 2 to 3 years out before we would have completed homes.
You said so many interesting things there. One might wonder, why go through that hassle of building on an infill lot, which might only be, say, 1/4 acre lot, and you have to track down the owner in Kansas City or Wichita or wherever they are. But I think you gave us the answer. You said that they are build ready, meaning that oftentimes that utility infrastructure is there already, for example, and road access is already present.
Exactly. Yes. They come with their own set of challenges, but they're still faster than developing a whole new subdivision. And, they're in existing areas, which enables us to build in a wide range of areas. Because remember, we're here to rent these properties. So after we build them, we hand them off to our property management company, who has to then lease them up. The scattered infill lots give you a lot of variety over a wide geography that allow us to build more without oversaturating an individual area.
All right. Well, now that you have the tract, whether it's a bunch of contiguous ones or even if it's an individual infill one, talk to us about some of those major construction stages in order, because I was investing in real estate for quite a while until really I even understood all of those stages. So, for example, on new contiguous tracts, that might start with something like clearing and grubbing that area where you plan to build a number of homes and digging for foundations and putting a slab in and all that. So why don't you talk to us chronologically, Chris, about those major construction stages from beginning to end?
So we'll talk about the big subdivisions first, and then we'll talk about infill lots. On the larger subdivisions, you're exactly right. Once you get all of your permits, so you have to get a permit from the St. John's River Water Management District. You have to get one from the Army Corps of Engineers. You have to get a permit from the local utility company. You have to get a permit from the local municipality. And if it's a city and a county, you might have to get one from both of them. So there's a litany of permits that you have to get, and you have to engineer the site, meaning that you have to design the site to make sure that you're accounting for all the impervious material that you're putting on. So impervious material being roads, houses. The biggest part of the engineering is really making sure that water goes where you want it to, whether that's sewer flowing in the right direction towards a lift station on the site, or whether that's rainwater flowing into the drain basins that you build on the site. When you're done, it all looks like, oh, okay, they just moved a bunch of dirt down around and put a road down. But there's really a lot of math and engineering that went into making sure that it functions properly and that you can really get rid of the water.
That overall site drainage pattern from embankments to swales.
Exactly. So once you have those engineered plans, that's when you can go get your clearing permit. And you're exactly right. The first step is your clearing and grubbing. So clearing's pretty simple, right? You're cutting the trees down. You're either going to cut them down and haul them off, if somebody's willing to buy them for lumber, or you're burning them on site to get rid of them. After you do the clearing, then you're doing the grubbing. And that's typically where a tractor with a very big looking claw thing on the front of it runs through the dirt, and it picks up all the stumps and all the roots and everything that you would not want under the foundation of your house. You get all of that stuff out of the way. The next part depends on your site specifically. So if you have a site that's already at grade, meaning that the engineering plans fit with the local topography of the location, then you can go along your merry way. If not, and a lot of times in Florida, you have to fill the site. And what that means is you've got to bring dirt, whether you're digging dirt out of a pond on the property, or you're bringing in dirt from another location to raise the level of the site. And you might have to raise that site for multiple reasons. One main reason in Florida that we raise sites is to take them out of a flood zone. Florida is very flat. To get out of a flood zone, you might have to raise a property 2 or 3 feet. And then, so you raise the whole site 2 or 3 feet, and then now all of a sudden you're out of the flood zone. So that's one main reason that you would raise them. The other main reason would be if you needed to raise a portion of the site to make it drain properly. When you look at it, you think about, You ever see that game where there's like a little marble that you're trying to roll around and you're moving the sides up and down? Well, that's essentially what you're doing with the dirt. So you're adding dirt to one side to make it slope towards the other side. So sometimes you need to fill one side of the site to make it higher than the other, to make your drainage work and to make your sewer systems work. After the waste flushes out of your home, it goes down into the pipes, but it still has a long way to go from there. And so you have to make sure that those sewer pipes are sloped in the right direction. So the ground has to be higher in those areas to make sure that that slope works properly. So let's assume you had to fill the site. Now we've filled the site and we've got several layers of dirt, which all need to be compacted. So typically in 1 foot lifts, you have to lay the dirt down and then roll a big roller over it to make sure it's nice and compacted. And once all of that's done, then you can start the pipe work, the underground work.
This is fill then that's already been brought in, oftentimes to elevate the site. And now you have to excavate back down into the fill that was just compacted with rollers, like some people call these things steamrollers. Yes.
Yep, exactly. Now you've got to dig trenches in that nicely compacted dirt that you just did. You've got to dig trenches, and that's where you're going to start putting those sanitary systems. So the sanitary systems typically run underneath the road. You dig down, you dig a trench, you put the main sanitary line in, and then you're putting laterals out where each house is going to be. So there's a pipe coming off of the main, and it's stubbed out in the front yard of the home in which you're going to build eventually, but you're still a long way from building. After you get the sewer in, same thing with water. A main water line goes down the middle, and you're pulling laterals off of that. You're putting them to where the water meter box is ultimately going to be. And then you're starting with your stormwater system. So then your stormwater system goes in, and that's what collects and transports all of the just runoff into the catch basins. And the catch basins are very important. And really what a catch basin does is it makes sure that we're not polluting. Cars drive on these roads. There's oil that's leaking on the roads and gasoline or whatever may be leaking on the roads. When all of that goes into these catch basins, these retention ponds, those are really big septic tanks, for lack of a better. The water is meant to perk through those. It's meant to filter out any of the impurities before that water goes back into our wetlands and before it goes back into potentially seeping down into the ground and being drinking water. The point of those is to stop the water from just flooding straight into our wetlands as dirty water. Once it goes to the catch basins, it's cleaned. It's a very important part of the process, not to mention it creates big lakes and ponds on the properties, which look pretty. So now we've put in all of our storm pipe, we've put in all of our sanitary sewer, we've put in all of our water lines. Now we put all the dirt back on top and we re-roll the dirt over top of them, make sure it's nice and compacted.
Chris and I are going deep, really in a literal sense here with all this work that we're doing in the ground. And how many residents think about this as they carefully monitor the thermostat on their air conditioner inside their unit?
This is it. This is my one time to explain how much work goes into all this. Then we go to the electrical side of things. So we have to put in conduit underneath all the roads. So we have to put in crossings everywhere the primary lines for the electric are going to come in. Once we put that conduit down, now we can go ahead and put in our curbs. So the curb that goes along the side of the road, we put the curb in. Then we put down a sub base in between the curbs. So, where the road's going to be, you have to put down a sub base and a base. Then you're putting asphalt on top of that. We're putting down typically one layer of asphalt to begin with. From that point, then the electric company has to come do their thing. So it's the electric company's responsibility to come put transformers on the site. If there's street lights, the electric company comes and put those in, and then they pull the primary lines to the transformers. They do what's go hot. When they go hot, that's when we can actually start to use our lift station. And I haven't described that yet, but the lift station, when I was mentioning earlier how the sewer has to be angled in a way that it's going in the right direction, well, the direction it's headed is to the lift station. All the sewer goes to the lift station via gravity, meaning that there's no pumps. It's just all flowing in a gravity manner. Then when it goes to the lift station is a high pressure pump. So on one side, it's gravity sewer coming in. On the other side, it's a high pressure and force main line going out. So the sewer gets pumped now out of this high pressure line into the main city line. When the power gets turned on from the power company, that's when we're able to then turn on the sewer system. This is when everything really starts to come to life. This is when we can now go ahead and start to build some houses.
That's a brilliant description of all the site work that needs to be done. A lot of people have no idea what all that encompasses. And now we're just starting to build the home. So why don't you talk to us about that with the excavation of the foundation and so on?
In Florida, we build what's called slab-on-grade for the most part. Every once in a while, we'll have to have a stem wall, but for the most part, it's slab-on-grade. And what that means is that we dig a foundation. It's a very shallow foundation. And inside the foundation is still dirt. So the foundation is poured, the form boards go up around, and then there's a foundation below, and that's poured in place up and through above the dirt above. And then there's form boards that go all the way around, which makes the slab. That's the portion of the house that you can actually see. So when you drive down the road and a house is under construction, you see a slab of concrete with a bunch of pipes sticking out. Before we pour that concrete, we've already put all the plumbing in place underneath. So all of the water and sewer lines have been put in, and they're roughed in through the dirt, and they're sticking up out of the ground. And then we pour the slab over top of that so that everything is set in place where it's supposed to be. From that point, we have to let the slab cure, so we have to let it dry and harden. And from there, then you begin the framing portion. So if you're building the house with frame, meaning you're building it with lumber, then you would go ahead and bring in all the lumber and you build the walls. And then once the walls are built, you would fly the trusses, meaning you have a crane come out and it picks up the prefabricated trusses, the triangle things.
Those big triangular wood pieces, the roof trusses,
exactly,
yes.
Exactly, which have been in short supply here for the last 2 years. And you put those up. You may, on the other hand, build a block home, in which case you would then be stacking the block on top of that slab. But then when you're done doing that, then you fly the trusses over that. And now it starts to look like a house, right? But interestingly enough, that's a massive part, where you go from just a piece of dirt to then now you've got a house with trusses up. You've put the OSB on top, the big plywood pieces on top, and now it looks like a house, right? That portion, assuming you can get the materials, which is a whole different story. We won't talk about that today. Assuming that the materials are readily available, that portion of the process goes pretty fast. It's everything else that happens in between. But early on, you go, wow, we went from nothing to a house. But then there's so much of the detail work that happens inside.
Yeah, and there's so much work that takes place until anyone driving by could really tell, oh, there is going to be a house there, as we learned about a lot of that site work. Chris, being a builder, oftentimes in the media, we'd like to know what's going on out there because we see these builder confidence indices numbers be released. And so many of these builder confidence index numbers show that there's a real loss in confidence among builders lately because builders are concerned that buyers are not going to be able to afford homes with higher mortgage interest rates. So what do you really see going on at the street level there amidst these lower builder confidence index readings?
Retail home builders are very nervous right now, and for good reason. I mean, these rates have gotten so high that it really has become difficult for home buyers to buy homes. There's good reason for them to have a lack of confidence. I mean, the number of sales for retail home sales, it has declined. And I think obviously that's what the Fed is trying to do.
Sure.
They're trying to slow everything down. I personally don't think it's a terrible thing. I mean, I hope it doesn't last forever, because there's a portion of the population that wants to be homeowners. Now, fortunately, we are in the rental business. So a lot of people not buying homes means there's a lot more people renting homes. So for us, it's a double-edged sword. As investors, we hate seeing interest rates go up because obviously that puts stress on our yields and it compresses our returns. It does all these negative things. But on the flip side, we've got a lot more renters entering the market. Rents continue to increase, which helps offset some of these increased interest rates. While we don't love the interest rates, we do certainly love all the tenants coming into the space that might have otherwise bought homes. It's just part of the world. We have to deal with it. As an investor buyer, I feel blessed to be in this position because the one thing that is not permanent is your interest rate. I'm personally of the belief that when the Fed did their last rate increase, they probably took it a little too far overboard, considering what we've seen in the market. I think that it's at some point in the future, and I don't know whether that's 6 months, 12 months, 3 years. I think it's probably going to be sooner rather than later. Those rates are going to come back down. And the beauty of investment property, if you've picked up all that additional rent along the way and then the rates come back down, now you're picking up the extra returns on the other side. So from a builder confidence perspective, I think it really depends on what you're building. If you're selling to retail home buyers, confidence is in the toilet. If you're building for rent, then I think you've got mixed emotions about it all.
For owner-occupant home buyers, higher rates are just almost across the board a bad story. But for us as real estate investors, and you touched on it, higher rates correlate with higher rents. Chris, with what you were telling us about before, with all those construction stages, clearly a builder needs to do a lot of planning. So with that in mind, will banks still give you a loan to build a property without an under contract buyer?
Yeah, they will. Particularly, again, for our build to rent space, it's a little bit of a different story. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the answer probably would have been no. The build to rent space back then was seen as riskier than selling to retail home buyers. Today, it's quite the opposite. There's real rental income, even though yields have been compressed by interest rates. There's real rental income to be gained right now, which is what the banks are looking at. So we see a lot of banks that aren't even qualifying the income of the owner buying it. They're qualifying the income of the property. And if it meets a debt service coverage ratio, they're making the loan on those investment properties. And they see it for multiple reasons. One is, of course, the property can support itself. So a bank loves that. But two is there's a lot more reasons that investor buyers are buying property than just cash flow. If you're a retail home buyer, you're buying a home because you need shelter and you're buying based on what that payment is. And that's really your key goal. You hope that it appreciates. You love to get whatever benefits you can from real estate ownership. But investment real estate ownership, you're not looking at. You don't need shelter. You've got shelter, wherever you live in your life. But you're looking for the rental income, but you're also potentially looking for depreciation and accelerated depreciation. There's great programs right now where the depreciation can be almost as much as your down payment in the first year. And then obviously hedging against inflation, owning that real asset with today's dollars, meaning that your loan is in today's dollars, but you're paying it back with inflated dollars as time goes on. These are all reasons that investors are looking at this market and that banks are okay to lend on it. The bank looks at, does the property itself make sense? The banks know that the investor buyers have multiple reasons to be making that investment.
You're a property manager as well, and renter selection is interesting because when one buys a home, the lender decides if the home buyer income is adequate. But when one rents a home, the property manager decides if the tenant income is adequate. You're listening to Get Rich Education. We've been talking about home building. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Since 2014, the powerful Get Rich Education podcast has created more passive income for people than nearly any other show in the world. This show teaches you how to earn strong returns from passive real estate investing in the best markets without losing your time being a flipper or landlord. Show host Keith Weinhold writes for both Forbes and Rich Dad Advisors and delivers a new show every week. Since 2014, there's been millions of listener downloads in 188 world nations. He has A-list show guests include top-selling personal finance author Robert Kiyosaki. Get Rich Education can be heard on every podcast platform, plus it has its own dedicated Apple and Android listener phone apps. Build wealth on the go with the Get Rich Education podcast. Sign up now for the Get Rich Education podcast or visit GetRichEducation.com.
Hey, my friend Damian Lupo informed me that checkbook IRAs have been made illegal by the U.S. tax court. If you have a checkbook IRA, your holdings are now disqualified with taxes and penalties up to 50%. But don't panic, Damian and the EQRP company can fix this. Those IRAs can be converted into EQRPs retroactive to last year, getting those tax deductions and reducing your taxable income. And this way, you can invest your 401k or IRA in real estate, Bitcoin, gold, and even your own business. So whether you're a full-time investor or retired or even a dentist with dozens of employees, if you're listening, you qualify, the EQRP works. It's the solution. You'll control your money, kill UBIT, and pay way less taxes. To learn more about this strategy and free up your retirement money, get the newest EQRP special report. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. That's text GRE to 307-213-3475. You can get a 50-year-old house somewhere or buy a new one directly from the builder with Tenant resilient amenities already built in. With over 3,000 Florida units at different construction stages, they are exclusively for investors. President Wagner Nolasco and team also invest strongly in their own product. That's belief. Start at build2rentdirect.com. That's build2rentdirect.com. Or text 407-927-5074.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking about home building and more in Florida and Georgia with a builder here. And Chris, what are you building lately? Single family homes up to fourplexes, larger?
We build single family homes, duplexes, and quadruplexes are primary builds. We do also build townhomes. And in the future, we have plans and we're under development on several projects where we'll have some 6-unit, 9-unit, 15-unit buildings. We have not sold any of those to date. That's a new product type for us, but primarily single-family duplex and quadruplex.
We all know that the national housing supply is low, and it's going to take us a while to get back up out of that and into a balanced condition. It's what I call inelastic. This dearth of housing supply is just difficult to compensate for anytime soon. You operate in high growth areas. Is there anything you can tell us about the supply of housing, specifically with the housing types that you provide in the areas that you work in?
Housing is still extremely tight. And honestly, I think that it's going to get tighter. My personal opinion, Q4 and Q1, we might see an uptick in inventory, but still nothing like we saw in 2008. The inventory levels are just so low right now. We don't have enough permits out there to even come close to having the oversupply that we had 20 years ago. We see extreme shortage. And then from a product standpoint, we see a lot of folks looking for a little bit more of affordable place. Energy is expensive right now. We see a lot of folks going to our smaller units these days. So at quadruplexes where the units are 1,000 to 1,250 square feet keeps their bills down. Typically, we're building those kind of closer into town as opposed to single families, which are typically a little bit more out of town in the suburbs. Our single families are still renting great, and we have great demand there. But we definitely have seen a segment of the population say, hey, I really want to minimize my footprint in these expensive times of energy and food and everything else going up.
And of course, I think of fourplexes as being in an investor sweet spot, since that's the most number of doors that you can get at the most advantageous financing terms as well. So, all right, a lot of single family homes up to fourplexes. Of course, single family homes have their own set of advantages, especially one of high liquidity and being able to attract a high quality tenant in single family homes. So there are so many pros and cons between single family homes and fourplexes. Well, Chris, talk with us about what you're seeing for pricing, because we have a lot of investor listeners interested in putting property in their portfolio. We have very well educated listeners that realize that even though mortgage rates are up, actually they're still below their historic long-term average, and you're still borrowing at less than the rate of inflation. So tell us more about the pricing of what you built.
I'm proud to say that we still have properties that start with a 2. Meaning that we still have properties that start in the mid 200,000
fleeting condition. Yeah,
it's very difficult to do that these days. So I think our lowest property type right now on a single family home is 270. Our lowest multifamily home is probably around $410,000, $420,000. We're very close to a couple $100,000 per unit on some of our product. It's very hard to do in today's market. Price ranges go from a single family home, say 250 to 270,000, all the way up to a quadruplex that could be $1 million, depending on the area and depending on the size, 700 to $1 million on a quadruplex.
That's good to know, Chris. And before I ask you if you have any last thoughts for our audience at all, if you want to get started with new build rental properties in the path of progress in Florida and at times in Georgia, you can check out those properties and connect with the provider here at gremarketplace.com/southeast. Yeah, Chris, what a great chat. I feel like I was almost wearing suspenders and I had work gloves on there earlier. So I think we cleaned up a bit. Do you have any last thoughts?
We touched on it a little bit, is interest rates. And I would say right now, one of the things that I'm telling all of our clients is be creative about your financing. There's some great financing options out there that we didn't look at 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when the Fannie and Freddie money was so cheap. Fannie and Freddie money is still great, and there's some great options to do rate buy downs on the Fannie and Freddie. But there's also some great interest-only loans out there in the marketplace today. And we've even seen some people doing some construction to perm financing. So in today's market, interest rates look high, but there's ways to get that rate down, if you really pay attention. And of course, we're happy to help you and introduce you to folks that we know that are providing the best rates for our clients. But I think everybody's talking about these interest rates, but don't let them scare you too much. There are ways around it.
And at times recently, it's been noted that ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, are 1.5% lower than a comparable fixed rate mortgage. Well, Chris, it's been valuable as always. Thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great to see you.
Yeah, strong insights from Chris today. It's really good to have the detail about how a home is built from the ground up here in this show's history. What a great description. And unless you have construction experience, you have probably learned something new today here on GRE Podcast episode 418. As you can tell, there really is a lot of time spent down in the ground moving dirt around. You've probably noticed that phenomena before if you've had construction occur near you sometime in your life. Yes, that's one of our GRE marketplace providers there that operates across a fairly wide swath of northern and central Florida and into Georgia with a lot of activity in and around Ocala, Florida. That's what we were talking about there. In inflationary times, income property is a proven place for tying up good debt. And at some level, banks know this, and they believe in it so strongly that they'll lend you 75 to 80% of the property value. And of course, your tenant pays it back for you at the same time that inflation debases that debt for you. Really a core GRE concept there. Get started with seeing if it makes sense to put more quality new build income property in a growth area into your portfolio at gremarketplace.com/southeast. That is gremarketplace.com/southeast. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.